There comes a moment in almost every empath's life that feels less like a decision and more like waking up from anesthesia. Nothing dramatic happens at first. No thunder, no huge argument, no cinematic scene where everybody suddenly reveals who they are. Instead, it's a tiny pause. A text message comes in, and for the first time, you don't rush to answer it. Someone asks for a favor, and instead of automatically saying yes, your mind asks a question it has never asked before. Do I actually want to do this? That's the beginning. And almost nobody notices it except you. Because the empath's entire identity has often been built around one unconscious mission. Keep everybody comfortable. Keep everybody happy. Keep everybody from leaving. Keep everybody from being upset. An empath walks into a room and immediately starts collecting data. Who looks sad? Who seems angry? Who feels uncomfortable? Who needs reassurance? Who needs rescuing? It's like having a radar system that never turns off. The problem is that radar wasn't necessarily developed because you'd proved magical or spiritually gifted. A lot of the time, it was developed because, somewhere in your past, reading people became a survival skill. You learned to notice tiny changes in tone. You learned to predict moods. You learned to anticipate emotional weather before the storm hit. You became an expert at emotional forecasting. And because you became so good at understanding everyone else's feelings, something strange happened. You slowly stopped checking in with your own. You became the translator, the peacemaker, the emotional paramedic, the one everyone calls, the one everyone leans on, the one everyone trusts. But trust and use can sometimes look identical, and that's where the story changes. Because one day the empath becomes tired. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying emotional weight that was never yours. And in that exhaustion, something dangerous begins to happen. You start seeing patterns. You remember the times you answered every late-night call, but nobody answered yours. You remember the birthdays you organized, the crises you helped solve, the tears you sat with, the problems you fixed. And then you remember something uncomfortable. Very few people did the same for you. This is where the awakening begins. Because empaths don't usually break because they give too much. They break because they finally notice the imbalance. For years, they believed they were surrounded by deep relationships. Then they realized they were surrounded by transactions. As long as you listened, you were valuable. As long as you sacrificed, you were important. As long as you carried everyone's emotions, you belonged. And then comes the experiment. The empath stops. Just a little. They stop initiating every conversation. They stop checking in every day. They stop volunteering for every problem. They stop apologizing for things they didn't do. And then something incredible happens. Silence. People who claimed they couldn't live without you suddenly disappear. People who called you family suddenly become strangers. People who always needed you no longer seem to know your number. This is one of the most painful truths an empath can ever discover. Some people don't miss you. They miss access to you. Read that again. They don't miss your heart. They miss your availability. They don't miss your presence. They miss your labor. They miss your emotional energy. They miss the version of you that made their life easier. This realization feels like betrayal. Because the empath assumed love was mutual. The empath assumed effort was reciprocal. The empath assumed that because they cared deeply, everyone else cared deeply too. But people often love us according to the role we play in their life. And when the role changes, the relationship changes. That's not cynicism. That's observation. And observation changes everything. Because once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing that some people only contact you when they need something. Some people only become affectionate after they've neglected you. Some people create emergencies because they know you'll come running. Some people don't want your healing. They want your availability. Some people don't want your growth. They want your predictability. The people around you have developed an image of who you are. The reliable one. The understanding one. The forgiving one. The endlessly patient one. And the moment you begin changing, you threaten that image. This is why setting boundaries often makes people angry. Healthy people respect boundaries. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries often resist them. An empath says, "I need some time for myself," and suddenly they're accused of being selfish. An empath says, "I can't help right now," and suddenly they're called cold. An empath says, "That behavior hurt me," and suddenly they're told they're too sensitive. This is the moment many empaths become confused, because they spent their entire lives believing kindness would protect them. But kindness without boundaries becomes permission. And permission attracts people who consume. The empath starts looking backward. and old memories suddenly make sense. That friend who always had a crisis. That partner who only changed when they were about to lose you. That family member who treated you like a therapist. The signs were always there. You just interpreted them through compassion. Compassion is beautiful, but compassion without discernment can become self-abandonment. Think about that. How many times did you explain someone's behavior because you understood their pain? How many times did you tolerate disrespect because you knew their childhood was difficult? How many times did you excuse betrayal because you could see their wounds? Empaths often become experts at understanding why people hurt them, and in understanding the reasons, they accidentally give permission for the behavior to continue. Understanding someone is not the same thing as accepting mistreatment. You can understand a person's trauma and still walk away. You can love someone and still say no. You can forgive someone and never allow them back into your life. This is the truth that changes everything. Empathy is not obligation. The moment an empath realizes this, their entire world shifts. Because they begin asking questions they never asked before. Why am I always the one giving? Why do I feel guilty for resting? Why do I feel responsible for everyone else's emotions? Why do I panic when someone is upset with me? Why do I need to be needed? That last question is a big one. Because sometimes people-pleasing isn't about kindness. Sometimes it's about fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of abandonment. Fear of conflict. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of not being lovable unless you're useful. When you start seeing that, your entire identity begins to reorganize itself. You realize you've been performing emotional labor for approval. You've been earning love. You've been negotiating for acceptance. You've been buying connection with sacrifice. And the bill finally comes due. That's when the empath stops. Not because they became cruel. Not because they stopped caring. But because they finally understand that abandoning yourself to keep other people comfortable is not love. It's a survival strategy. And survival strategies eventually become prisons. The truth is that many empaths don't know who they are outside of helping people. Take away the rescuing. Take away the fixing. Take away the emotional caretaking. Who are you? The question feels terrifying, because your identity has been built around service. You know everyone else's preferences, everyone else's dreams, everyone else's fears. But your own? Sometimes they're a mystery. And that's why this stage feels lonely. You're not only losing relationships, you're losing roles. You're losing identities. You're losing versions of yourself that kept you safe. The old version of you would answer immediately. The old version of you would smooth everything over. The old version of you would absorb the tension. But this new version pauses. This new version asks questions. This new version notices patterns. And once you begin noticing patterns, something else happens. You stop chasing people. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to prove your goodness. You stop carrying conversations by yourself. You stop begging for reciprocity. You stop overextending. You stop auditioning for love. And that's when people begin saying you've changed. They're right. You have. The difference is that you're no longer participating in relationships that require your self-erasure. And some people cannot tolerate the healthier version of you because the healthier version of you has limits. The healthier version of you says no. The healthier version of you leaves. The healthier version of you observes instead of immediately rescuing. The healthier version of you recognizes manipulation. And once you can recognize manipulation, it loses much of its power. Because manipulation depends on unconscious participation. The empath used to respond automatically. Now they respond intentionally. And intentional people are very difficult to control. The first time an empath stops automatically rescuing people, it feels wrong. Not a little wrong. Deeply wrong. Like you're breaking an invisible rule that you've lived by your entire life. You sit there staring at your phone. You see the message. You know exactly what the person wants. You know exactly how this conversation ends. They'll unload. You'll listen. You'll comfort. You'll absorb. And then, somehow, you'll be the one emotionally exhausted by the end of it. Again. But this time you wait. And in that waiting, something strange happens. You start hearing your own thoughts. You start noticing your own emotions. You start realizing that your entire nervous system has been trained to react to everyone else before it ever checks in with you. This is why so many empaths struggle with boundaries. A boundary doesn't only challenge other people. It challenges your own conditioning. Because your body has learned that saying yes equals safety. Keeping people happy equals safety. Avoiding conflict equals safety. Being needed equals security. And the moment you stop doing those things, your nervous system sends out alarms. Danger. Someone might be upset. Someone might leave. Someone might think badly of you. But here's the truth most people never realize. The discomfort you feel when setting boundaries isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're doing something different. And different feels dangerous to a mind that has spent years surviving through people-pleasing. Then another realization arrives. A painful one. You start noticing how often you've betrayed yourself. You remember all the times you agreed when you wanted to say no. All the times you stayed silent when something hurt you. All the times you laughed things off because confronting someone felt too risky. All the times you gave people another chance when every part of you already knew the outcome. And that's when the anger appears. Not anger at everyone else. Anger at yourself. Why didn't I see it sooner? Why did I let this happen? Why did I tolerate so much? But the truth is, you didn't tolerate it because you were weak. You tolerated it because your heart was trained to prioritize connection over protection. You believed understanding people would keep relationships alive. You believed giving more would eventually create balance. You believed if you loved hard enough, people would eventually love you the same way. That's a beautiful belief. It's also one of the reasons so many empaths become emotionally exhausted. Because not everyone operates from the same emotional depth. Not everyone thinks like you. Not everyone notices what you notice. Not everyone gives the way you give. And this realization changes the way you see the world. You stop assuming everyone has good intentions. You stop assuming everyone is as considerate as you are. You stop assuming everyone feels guilty when they hurt someone. You stop assuming everyone values loyalty the way you do. And that doesn't make you cynical. It makes you accurate. Accuracy is one of the greatest forms of self-protection. Because the truth is, many empaths don't get hurt because they're too loving. They get hurt because they project their own heart onto other people. They think, I would never do that to someone. I would never ignore someone I care about. I would never use someone's kindness. I would never manipulate someone emotionally. And because they would never do those things, they assume other people wouldn't either. That's the trap. People are not you. They don't all have your intentions. They don't all have your level of empathy. And when you finally understand that, your relationships begin changing. You become slower to trust. Not colder. Just more observant. You listen to actions instead of promises. You watch patterns instead of excuses. You pay attention to consistency instead of chemistry. Because chemistry can lie. Words can lie. Potential can lie. Patterns almost never do. The person who always disappears when you need them, that's a pattern. The person who only reaches out when they're lonely, that's a pattern. The person who apologizes but never changes, that's a pattern. The person who makes you responsible for their emotions, that's a pattern. And when an empath starts seeing patterns, the entire game changes. Because they stop arguing with reality. For years they saw red flags and called them misunderstandings. They saw selfishness and called it stress. They saw manipulation and called it pain. They saw inconsistency and called it confusion. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. You begin accepting people for who they repeatedly show themselves to be. Not who they say they are. Not who they could become. Not who you hope they might be. Who they actually are. This is one of the most difficult lessons for an empath. Because empaths are visionaries. They see potential everywhere. They see the wounded child behind bad behavior. They see the pain behind anger. They see the loneliness behind arrogance. They see the fear behind control. And because they see these things, they often stay far too long. They become emotionally invested in who someone could be instead of paying attention to who they are. Potential is a dangerous thing. You cannot have a relationship with potential. You cannot build trust with potential. You cannot create peace with potential. You can only have relationships with reality. And reality often hurts. Because reality says, some people like being rescued. Some people enjoy taking without giving. Some people don't want to heal. Some people don't want accountability. Some people don't want a healthy relationship. Some people simply want access to your energy. The empath eventually learns something powerful. Not everyone who needs help wants help. Some people want enablers. Some people want caretakers. Some people want emotional servants. Some people want someone who will continue tolerating behavior that nobody else will tolerate. The moment you stop playing that role, they become angry. Not because you've done something wrong, because you've changed the agreement. There was an unspoken contract. You give. They take. You understand. They repeat. You forgive. They continue. And now the contract is broken. You no longer volunteer to carry what isn't yours. You no longer absorb every emotion in the room. You no longer become everyone's emergency response team. And suddenly, some people accuse you of becoming selfish. But healthy people don't call boundaries selfish. People who benefited from your exhaustion do. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Sometimes the people who resist your healing are the people who benefited most from your wounds. Think about that. Who was rewarded by your inability to say no? Who gained from your guilt? Who profited from your overgiving? Who became comfortable with your self-sacrifice? Those people may not celebrate your growth, because your growth changes the entire relationship, and change makes people uncomfortable, especially when your old behavior made their life easier. This is why the empath often experiences a strange kind of loneliness during awakening. You begin outgrowing relationships. Conversations feel different. Certain friendships feel heavy. Certain environments feel draining. Certain dynamics suddenly become obvious. You notice how often people interrupt you, how often they redirect conversations back to themselves, how often they expect understanding without offering any, how often they assume your availability. It's like someone turned on a light in a dark room. You can finally see what has always been there. At first, this awareness is painful, because you start questioning everything. Did they ever really care? Was I being used? Was I only valuable because of what I gave? Sometimes the answer is complicated. Some people genuinely care about you and still become dependent on your people-pleasing. Some people love you and still take you for granted. Some people don't intentionally use you. They simply became accustomed to a version of you that never had needs. When you begin expressing those needs, the relationship has to adapt. Healthy relationships adapt. Unhealthy ones resist. And that's the test. Not whether people like your boundaries, but whether they can respect them. Because real love makes room for your humanity. Real love allows you to be tired. Real love allows you to have limits. Real love allows you to say no. Real love doesn't require your self-destruction. The empath slowly begins learning a new language. The language of self-respect. And at first, it feels awkward. You say no and feel guilty. You take time for yourself and feel selfish. You decline invitations and feel responsible for everyone's disappointment. You stop rescuing someone and feel like you've abandoned them. But then something incredible happens. Nothing. The world doesn't end. People survive your boundaries. People survive your absence. People survive hearing the word no. And this realization is liberating. Because you've spent so much of your life acting as if everyone else's emotions were your responsibility. They're not. You are responsible for your behavior, your choices, your words, your integrity. You are not responsible for managing every reaction around you. That's impossible. And it's exhausting. The empath eventually realizes that they have been carrying emotional responsibilities that never belonged to them. You cannot heal everyone. You cannot save everyone. You cannot fix everyone. You cannot make everyone understand you. You cannot make everyone appreciate you. You cannot love someone into becoming who they refuse to be. That's one of the hardest truths of all. Love is powerful, but love cannot replace willingness. Love cannot replace accountability. Love cannot replace effort. And the empath finally stops trying to drag people toward healing. Instead, they start asking a new question. Who is pouring into me? Who makes me feel safe? Who respects my limits? Who listens when I speak? Who shows up when I need them? Who values me beyond what I can do for them? These questions change everything. Because for the first time, your energy starts flowing inward instead of outward. You begin taking care of yourself with the same devotion you've always given everyone else. You rest. You reflect. You become quiet. You rediscover parts of yourself that were buried beneath years of emotional labor. You remember what you enjoy. You remember your dreams. You remember your preferences. You remember that you are a person too. And perhaps that's the biggest awakening of all. The empath finally understands that they deserve the same kindness they've spent a lifetime giving away. They deserve reciprocity. They deserve peace. They deserve relationships that don't require constant sacrifice. They deserve to exist without earning their place through suffering. And once this truth settles into your bones, something irreversible happens. You stop chasing. You stop convincing. You stop proving. You stop shrinking. You stop abandoning yourself. You become selective with your energy. You become protective of your peace. You become intentional with your relationships. And some people will not recognize this new version of you. That's okay, because this version wasn't created to be more convenient. It was created to be more honest. And honesty changes everything. Because the empath who sees the truth can never again pretend they don't. The empath who has learned their worth can never again comfortably settle for one-sided relationships. The empath who has discovered boundaries can never again mistake self-sacrifice for love. You begin to understand something extraordinary. The people who truly love you don't disappear when you stop overgiving. They stay. They adjust. They respect your limits. They appreciate your honesty. They learn the new version of you. And those relationships become deeper than anything you had before, because they're no longer built on what you provide. They're built on who you are. And for perhaps the first time in your life, that feels like freedom.